The theme of this forum is quality of life and quality of life of our cities. And it's one overarching theme. It's a totally new range of issues: urban health, healthy city, and of course all of our activities and initiatives, all of our projects and programs are evaluated today from this standpoint of view, from this standpoint just how acceptable they are to our city dwellers, to our residents, and to what extent they increase their quality of life, their health level of people living in these cities. It is obvious that urbanization is capturing the world, and more people are living in cities, not only in cities, but in megacities. And these megacities are in turn becoming the driving forces of developing economy of the whole regions and countries. And statistic proves that megacities show bigger longevity, the longer lifespan than in the rural communities and elsewhere. But life expectancy, as it is, does not give us the perspective into quality of life, because life expectancy could be different. It could be going along with stresses, loneliness, and chronic diseases and things like that. And unfortunately, it is unfortunate that the perception about urban living, about big cities, all the previous decades and even today, the idea is that this is not the best place to live, and long time perspective that living in the city means stress, discomfort. It's a place of transport collapse. It's a place of the deficit of social services and very harsh environment. And the only thing that moves people into the cities is a career growth and higher levels of income. And these negative trends in the last decades has gave some people perspective that it's a certain perception about the cities which supposedly cannot be changed, that this will be the image and perception of big cities as long as they exist. And some people think the only way to improve one's life is to move out of the city to a quiet place, to the place where you have a lot of nature, landscapes, and only there you can get good harmony. But the city would be at best the place to get your education, to get your employment, and no more than that. I have to say that I am absolutely disagreeing with this perspective, and I believe that these kind of problems, they do exist with megacities, metropolitan areas, but these are historic issues and problems which can be turned around, they can be solved. In view of very gigantic scope and scale of these problems, they cannot be solved in one day, overnight, and by the wave of the magic baton. But if you set a goal, if you pursue this goal in a systemic way by channeling all of your energy and problem to tackle all these issues, to build a very comfortable urban environment, it is possible to do. It's my deep conviction. Just to give you an example, one of the main problem of megacities, and Moscow is not an exception, is daily commuting, daily pendulum migration, when a lot of workforce is concentrated in the downtown, in the center of the city, and millions of people are moving back and forth from the bedroom community, from the suburbia into the city core, creating transportation collapse, experiencing stress when they come to work and going back home, spending a lot of time every day commuting to their workplace and to their homes. And you would think there is nothing that can be done about that, because this is the way the city has been built. The older industrial zones do not exist anymore. The so-called bedroom communities do not have any jobs at them. All business is concentrated into the commercial areas, and all the commercial facilities and venues are being built very centrally in Moscow. And this is the place where the new office buildings and the shopping malls are being built, and the culture centers, and supposedly nothing can be done with it. But I believe that this is a big challenge indeed. It's a big problem. But nevertheless, if it is not 100% solvable, at least we can mitigate this situation. In the last years, we have established the program of renovating industrial zones. Instead of workplaces, they begin the places of the depressive states and discomfort, and now 2/3, 70% of these industrial zones in Moscow are under renovation at the stage of preparing the urban documentation, design documentation. 65 out of 200 of such zones are in the active stage of construction, and today the main volume of investments and creating these new communities, integrated development, applies to formerly industrial territories. The same can be said about creating the public catering spaces and retail areas. Today, more such facilities and venues are being built outside of the city core, outside of the third transportation ring in Moscow. And I have to draw your attention to the fact that our efforts and all communication with investors and very unpleasant and even a conflict situation when several years ago we had to break the investment contracts worth of $50 billion. These were the development projects which had to be implemented in the city center, and in this very location where you and I are sitting right now. They wanted to invest about $2 billion American dollars here in the commercial real estate, but now we have a Zaryadye Park and a concert hall where you and I are sitting at the moment. But this promoted us to engage in renovation of abandoned and industrial territories through integrated development. And today, in a very big way, we can witness the changes in the number of workplaces in the city center. They are being migrated beyond the third transportation ring, and this trend is very important indeed. Still, talking to investors, we can hear their feedback, their complaints that unfortunately construction of commercial real estate outside of the city center is not as viable and attractive an option for them. And we have using administrative leverage to make them do this. And in the near future, according to their proposals, we'll make a decision about nullifying payments for changing the titles and dedications when building commercial facilities outside of the third transportation ring in Moscow, which in a big way will improve the economic components of such projects. Next issue is a deficit of the transportation infrastructure for the city of Moscow. It used to be a real catastrophe. We had a sheer lack of roads, very uncomfortable public transportation systems, and a huge number of cars in Moscow, in the greater Moscow area. All of this had created a situation nearing us to transportation collapse. And you would think, okay, this is the historic legacy of the Moscow, and there is nothing that can be done about it. But still, several years ago, we had made a decision, we made a commitment of a gradual, step-by-step, moving towards improving this transportation situation in Moscow. First of all, I'm speaking about developing a public rapid transit system and expanding Moscow Metro. We set a goal several years ago that to make sure that 90% of the Muscovites would live within the walking distance from the nearby underground station. And today, this is the goal that has been implemented by 70%. Lately, we've built 80 stations of Russian Metro and the Moscow Central Circle. This is a very great tempo, very great rate of construction, surpassing even the Soviet experience, which also requires quite a big concentration of workforce and resources. Nevertheless, we are pursuing this goal very proactively, and for the next 5 years, we still have the huge program of Moscow Metro expansion ahead of us, including building the big circle of Moscow, of Metro in Moscow. And we've seen that problem of Moscow cannot be solved only by providing better transportation within the administrative barriers of Moscow, because we live in Moscow agglomeration. And it's not about 12 million, but 20 million people. And a huge number of people are migrating back and forth from Moscow and to outside of Moscow every day. And half of the private vehicles on the roads of Moscow, they are not vehicles belonging to people living within the Moscow limits. These are the cars which people use to come into the Moscow and move out of Moscow at the end of their workday. And we are working with our colleagues from the Moscow region, with the Russian railways, with the government of the Russian Federation, and with the support of the President of the Russian Federation. We've launched a very gigantic project of reconstructing railways leading into Moscow. I'm speaking about commuter train lines. And based on very fragmented links of these commuter trains, we want to build the end-to-end diameters, and thus radically increasing quality of the rail servicing. And we've doubled the number of passengers who are using commuter trains from 1 million residents to 2 million people. And our immediate plans to add another 1 million passengers to this commuter traffic, which are moving between the greater Moscow and the city core, including the Moscow central diameters. And this will drastically change transportation situation in Moscow and in the Moscow region. Nevertheless, Moscow is the place that has millions of cars. And every day, looking at the Moscow roads, we can see over 3 million unique vehicles driven all over Moscow. And these limitations, including the motivation for motorists and the paid parking systems, they enabled us to intensify the city center. But still, when intensifying the central streets, we could see the transit traffic through the central streets. To solve this problem for several years, not only have we been building some local junctions and highways and reconstruction of certain streets, but also building new highways, new linking roads, which enables us to move about the city, bypassing central part. I'm speaking about the northeastern, the southern lateral road. It's a huge project. You can see highlighted in red is what has been implemented, and the dotted lines what will be implemented in the near future. We've made quite a big way, and but still much has to be done.
Тем не менее,
Nonetheless, despite our every effort, the growth number of cars in Moscow continues. And we find ourselves in a situation that's some sort of a paradox. The more cars Muscovites own, the fewer cars we see on Moscow streets. And that's probably a solution. The fewer cars out there on street, the better traffic, the better environment, the more efficient public transport will be. So despite rapid growth in a number of cars, we see that traffic situation Moscow streets is improving, slow but steady. And this is the most important trend in our city. The environment is improving because 90% of emissions are accounted for by cars. There's less congestion, less traffic. Therefore, there's direct impact on the city environment. All projects, without exception, have impact on environment, whether we're talking about railroad, subway, or regular roads. Although you wouldn't expect it to improve environmental situation, but if we look at construction of this link road, this reduces excessive traffic by 5%. This is the amount of oxygen that's generated by 4 large parks, such as the Gorky Park. So you can imagine the huge volume of greenery that such link road can replace in terms of environmental impact. So this is important in itself. It does not mean that we do not need to develop our parks or green areas. Those efforts should take place simultaneously. Another problem is the quality of urban environment. Many are starting to forget how central streets looked just a few years back. City was becoming more and more stressful every year. People were feeling less and less comfortable. But I guess we can say today that the old city has been reconstructed. Over 300 streets were renovated. We invested heavily in renovation of inner yards, parks, and little squares throughout Moscow. And that did have an impact. Not only did we improve the quality of urban environment, we created new public spaces, conducive environment for people to spend more time outside, to feel city as a more friendly, comfortable space. Over 60 million people participate in urban festivals throughout a year. Those are festivals that take place in open spaces, in public spaces in Moscow. Another problem, which we think is very important, is social infrastructure. Not in an abstract way, but we're talking about very specific new facilities: kindergartens, schools, My Documents, administrative centers, hospitals. Over the past years, we've built hundreds of new facilities, and we've improved access to most Muscovites in most districts of Moscow. As we develop infrastructure, it's important to remember about urban health. Although as we improve urban environment, as we improve natural environment, that encourages people to lead more active lifestyle. But as we develop sports infrastructure, skating rinks, open air, workout, that has impact. And in recent years, the number of people that do fitness increased twofold. I tend not to trust statistics, not take it bluntly, but the general feeling is that the situation is really changing for the better. One of the big problems large cities are facing is loneliness, stress, social isolation. And that's especially important for the older generation. People that retire and spend most of their time home alone. And that has very negative impact on their mental health and physical health. This is why we set up a special program, Moscow Longevity, and tens of thousands of elderly Muscovites find new hobbies, new friends, and become young again. One of the most important problems for any city would be aging of housing stock. That's relevant for Moscow, Russia, for the world. This is the most difficult, the most impossible, as one might think, task. Residential buildings that were built 50, 60, 70 years ago that seemed so comfortable back then now becomes dilapidated. And in a few years' time, it will become dangerous for inhabitants. So something has to be done at the level of city authorities, federal authorities. A federal law on renovation of housing stock was passed in Moscow, and about 1 million Muscovites that live in those dilapidated houses are already part of the project. Its implementation has already started. We're working in different areas. We create social infrastructure, we improve quality of urban environment, we do renovation of streets, and as we do all that, we came to a very important conclusion. When you work in a big city, it's important to focus not just on landmarks, but on creating equal opportunities, equally comfortable environment throughout the city, in all districts. A city should be homogeneous in terms of quality of urban environment. Every house should be attractive. Citizens that live in all districts should have access to a full range of services, whether they live next to the city center or outside city center, because even a district in the outskirts that contains 100,000 people is like a city. I wanted to give you an example of how that happens. We have this area called Kapotna. It is surrounded by, on the one side, a refinery, one of the largest in Moscow. On the other side, there's Moscow River with embankment that's completely wild. On the third side, there's Moscow Circular Road. And no one would call this district comfortable or prosperous. So what could be done? When we first looked at it, it felt hopeless. But it turned out even this could be fixed. So we signed an agreement with the owners of the Moscow refinery that invested billions of dollars in a renovation project, and currently the factory is among the best environment-wise globally. They've reduced the number of emissions dramatically. The transportation was very difficult, but once the Southern Lateral Road is built, it will improve access to the area. And once improvement of urban environment is done, different parts of the district will be linked together. Residents will get access to Moscow River. There'll be a comprehensive program to develop inner yards, parks, and also important is to make sure that Kapotna has all the social services, health clinics, libraries, cultural centers, and there's a large program that's been implemented to achieve all that, and also renovation of housing stock. 40% of Kapotna dwellers will move to new houses. So in addition to planning, we need to think about healthcare. No one will live forever, no one will stay young forever. People will require medical assistance at some point in time. So we have launched a huge program to modernize health clinics. We provide new equipment at the European level, and most of our clinics are now equipped by European standards. All of that allows us to say that we have good prospects in terms of life expectancy. And we need to change our attitude towards the city. We need to make sure that a city is a place for long and happy life. With that, I thank you, my friends. Thank you very much, Sergei Semyonovich. Before we launch a discussion with our exceptional panelists, I wanted to mention that it isn't the first forum where we talk about environment as part of our agenda. So if we look at trends that are present globally today, we'll see that the paradigm is shifting. There's clear connection between city economy and city environment. Traditionally, experts would tell you, focus on economy and environment will follow suit. But over the past 10, 15 years, in the most advanced cities, over 20 years, the paradigm started shifting to something completely opposite. And now experts say, create good urban environment, and then you'll have outstanding economy. This environment will become engine of people, point of attraction for people, for money, investment. And if you look at the most advanced cities, this is what they do. They invest in urban environment and achieve exceptional economic results. And I hope this is what we'll talk about during our plenary session. For this, I would like to give the floor to Maimouna Sharif, United Nations Under Secretary General, Executive Director of UN Habitat, which is a key UN program for the development of cities. Madam Sharif, I wanted to ask you a question on how do you see priorities for the development of cities? Do megacities play a special role? Because we are right now in one of the world's largest cities. How can those megacities contribute to sustainable development? So sustainable development is really important for the United Nations. And what role could Moscow play, a host city of this urban forum, in terms of attaining sustainable development? What contribution could Moscow make? With this, over to you.
It works. It works. Just start.
Thank you very much for having me here. Excellencies Sergei Sobyanin, the mayor of Moscow. Okay. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon and dobre den. I'm trying to speak Russian. I'm delighted to be here today and would like to thank the distinguished Mayor of Moscow for inviting me to this opening plenary, and congratulations to the cities of Moscow for recognizing that sustainable urbanization is the way forward and our collective for national and global transformative agenda. And as UN Habitat is also helping, we are helping nations to ensure high quality of life for its citizens. That's the reason why our vision, United Nations Human Settlement or UN Habitat vision, is to provide quality of life for all in the urbanizing world. I think this is very, very important, and that's the mandate given by all of you, by the member state, to UN Habitat during the Habitat 3 in Quito. We are the custodian and of the Sustainable Development Goal 11, and also for the urbanization and human settlement. And I also would like to congratulate Moscow. I came here before in 2012, and I share my story with the mayor just now. And after 7 years, I came here as a mayor of Penang at that time, and now as executive director of UN Habitat. There are a lot of positive transformations in terms of the cities. Especially, I asked my colleague, where is the big orange color building somewhere here last time? And now it's changed into a public space. It's very, very spacious and giving back the space to the people. I think this is one of the activities, and also I think step taken by the Moscow cities to provide placemaking, to provide space for the people. And how can the urbanization of the mega cities that either it is help us or discourage us to move forward. And what I would like to share with you is that the urbanization is one of the important issues of our time and a central component in the sustainable development. and urbanization as a mega cities and a mega trend now. I think I would like to share with you that if we get our urbanization right, if we get our cities right, and we will be able to positively address some of the world's most critical challenges. So UN Habitat is working with all levels of government, with national government, regional government, local government, and even communities to work together to provide a better quality of life for all. And again, many of the Sustainable Development Goals and target has a direct connection to urbanization. For example, to make the cities right, to provide the basic facilities, basic amenities, accessible to the basic amenities like water, sanitation, housing or home, education. And this morning we were talking about urban health. So this is the human right. That is the needs of every individual, either they are in the cities, mega cities, or also in the human settlement. And this is also linked to the Sustainable Development Goal 6 on water, and also on the affordable housing and sustainable energy, Goal 12, sustainable consumption and production. And for this, I think the living conditions in each cities are key to meeting the relative targets. And my main message here, Excellencies, friends, ladies and gentlemen, all cities can be a massive agent of positive change. Change, it can be both negative and positive, but cities can be a massive agent of positive change if they are well planned, they are integrated, and they are also well built and well governed. Because governance is also important in urban sustainability. And cities can be the catalyst to link community, energy, economy, environment, science, and also the social and culture. And I think megacities like Moscow have a very specific distinctive role. I mean, you own your own gravity, you're pooling resources, talent, and capital together. This is very important for Moscow's future growth. It depends on how it can meet the challenges and climate change. Climate change now is not, people say that, is it true? It's a reality. I think we are now moving from climate change into climate crisis and climate emergency. So I think that's the reason why the United Nations Secretary General will be having the Secretary General Climate Change Summit next September in New York. And again, when we look towards the urban concentration and agglomeration of supercities, this is a cluster of supercities or cluster and megacities. What are the challenges? What are the solutions? I think Moscow can share together the best practices. Then when the mayors mentioned about urban regeneration, I've seen that a lot of urban regeneration in Moscow, placemaking, urban spaces, and also in terms of traffic, because many cities having the same issues and the same problem, only a different scale. And I think that is I also invited the mayor to plan to come together to our World Urban Forum in Abu Dhabi, and invite all of you. Please come to our World Urban Forum in Abu Dhabi 2020. And the next one will be the World Cities Day in Ekaterinburg in Russia to share together with all your best practices and your and also your problem and the challenges in meeting the life and giving the quality of life for the people in your cities. And I think that is, in any way, you have to look into the equality and equity of a citizen in either in the cities or megacities. This is also important, that sometimes that there are, even though they are in the cities, it's wealthy cities, there are group, a corner of the area that needs to be looked at. And in terms of but of course, generally, now we realize that last year when we give our progress report of the Sustainable Development Goal 11, there are more people living in slum. But the number of slum is decreased, but more people living in slum. And also in terms of the air pollution, and also in terms of the amount of income being spent on housing compared to the developed countries versus developing countries. These are the few issues that we are working together with many partners, and I would like to see that from the governance perspective, this is very important, and we have the good governance in managing and also planning the cities. And to me, prosperity in the megacities is not achieved by accident. It's achieved by proper planning, achieved by proper thought in terms of the tools and governance. And I would like to share with you that this UN Habitat for the past 40 years, we already have our strategic plan. We would like to come up with a principle or to be a thinker, a doer, and we would like to partner with all of you and to share our outcome. So we think, do, partner and share. And I would like to see here that we want to see either megacities, small cities or villages to be cleaner, not only clean from the rubbish, but clean in terms of governance, clean in terms of the way that we are doing things, greener, not only planting trees, include planting trees, but green procurement and green building, green tools, cleaner, is safer, is not only safe from the crime, but also feel safe. Sometimes we also feel unsafe in a crowd. So if you want to have a safer cities, cleaner, greener, safer, and we would like to have a healthy cities, apart from having the building a more medical center, and also through the urban design, through the planning, that we can get the healthy cities. But today I saw that many people jogging here, walking around. And of course, at the end of the day, when you have cleaner, when you have greener, when you have safer, when people are healthier, and you have a happier lot living in the urban dwellers. So we would like to see that cleaner, greener, safer, and healthier, and we can get a happier people. And thank you very much. Spasiba.
Спасибо, госпожа заместитель генерального секретаря.
Thank you, Maimuna, and I would like Mr. Bergner to take the floor. Hans Paul, you are one of the biggest global consulting companies. You are interacting with a large number of administrations and administrations of the cities of the world. You've been the author of strategies for many European and non-European megapolises and global cities. What indicators would be, in your opinion, would be the most important for cities in terms of moving forward? And given your very wide scope and experience, how does Moscow stand in comparison with many other global cities of the world? Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yes.
I think,
Keep closer to the mic, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Working with many of the major cities in here, of course, Moscow, but across Asia, the Americas, and Europe, I think we need to see that there is a Maslow pyramid also for cities in terms of stages of development and fulfilling the needs of its residents. Clearly, many big cities and smaller cities do not even provide basic infrastructure and basic services, but this is really the minimum. Then moving forward onto stages of providing a good environment, providing good services, social services, health, education, of course, engaging people on having a good also working environment and living environment with the right housing, and ultimately really making people feel proud of being part of a city, feeling that they really want to engage and help to move city to the next level. And I think the key to ensure that there's not just great infrastructure and good service and great services, but also a very strong perception. We need to make sure that people really feel that being part of the city is a major asset and really makes for a better life. The engagement means, engaging with the population, with the residents, and we call this a resident-centric city or policy, very much like companies talk about customer-centric policies and strategies. And I think this is a key element, and the mayor, Sergei Semyonovich, has already referred to that. Really engaging the citizens and the residents is really key there. The second is making sure that it's not just about the city center and having some mega projects in the center. It's about really ensuring that all parts of the city, whether you call them districts or sub-cities, really the many one, and we have 146 in Moscow here, are really part of this development, and that they also are feeling that within their sub-city and their district, they have the opportunities for working, for living, for housing, for entertainment, also for a good environment. And I think this element is key, and making really sure that you systematically work on those. And the third thing, of course, is to use technology, but not technology for the sake of technology, but really making sure that technology creates connectivity between the citizens, between the city government and the citizens, between businesses and the citizens. So really making sure that people really engage with each other and provide a better living. And when I look at what Moscow has achieved over the last 8 years, so Sergei Semyonovich, congratulations on a really great development in a relatively short period of time. Other cities have taken decades and sometimes even a century to achieve that. I think developments like the Saratya Park, I think a great example, which also got an award. Congratulations for that too. Also being named the #1 of the 40 global cities in the UN e-government development index, I think are demonstrating what Moscow has achieved. But it really is focusing on being resident-centric, on really developing not just a few mega projects, but really trying to develop all the various parts of the cities and the 146 developments, and ultimately then really engaging an ever larger group of citizens in high technology jobs and high service jobs, I think has made Moscow truly stand out. And the key is, and I think in that sense, Moscow can be a role model to really work on all these aspects rather than just thinking, okay, just a few mega projects will make the difference. It's really creating a resident-centric policy, and so I would say, well done.
Thank you, Hans-Pauls.
Hans-Pauls, thank you very much. And
could you tell us what kind of area in Moscow is the space for improvement from your point of view?
Well, I think always, the really best cities always see the most of improvement, and they are quite self-critical. And as I engaged with you, Sergei Semyonovich, beforehand, we talked about, how can we even make Moscow even more international, drawing even more talent from Asia, from the Middle East, from the rest of the world, and really spreading also this idea about having a future business community and resident community across the whole city. So not just have, a few,
reservation.
Well, a few tower projects, but really spreading it across the whole city. And I think there is still some room for improvement, which I think, of course, is always good. The work is never done.
Thank you. Спасибо, Hans.
It's Skolkovo. I guess what you meant is Skolkovo, not a reservation, rather, but the Skolkovo.
But of course, I think it's also important, to really, and Sergei Semyonovich, you said this, I think spread this across the whole city. And I think this is really crucial to make sure that people in each city have the opportunity to see there's vibrancies, there's dynamic, and there's an opportunity to move forward. And you don't have to go, far away to another part of the city.
Сергей Семенович, мы
Sergey, at the end, we will ask you to share a couple of words based on the outcomes of discussion. And you please accumulate your questions. And now I would like Andrei Kostin to take the floor, President and the Chairman of the VTB Bank. Andrei, VTB is one of the largest players, both on the mortgage market, but also on the developers project market. And I believe that some projects you enjoy, others rather not. What do you believe has to be done to increase affordability of the mortgage lending for residents? On one hand, and on the other hand, to make these projects more appealing. I mean, the projects which are being created by investors such as VTB, to ensure the attractability of our cities and make Moscow more attractive. Thank you. Actually, I enjoy and I'm happy to all of the projects which we do in the city of Moscow. And preparing for today's presentation, I've asked my employees to give me the information note where we have invested in the last 9 years. And I was surprised our direct investments alone amounted to 500 billion Russian rubles. If you take all the loans, 3.6 trillion Russian rubles. This is what we've invested in infrastructure without excluding mortgage lending. It's infrastructure only, and we believe that our group not only is a financial institution, but due to the sequence of events, the global credit crunch of the 2008, we became the global investor. We invest in many projects. As for the quality of housing and attraction of the housing, what Sergei Sobyanin has been speaking today about is first of all, it's about a new approach to urbanism, urban planning, not only to build certain number of square meters. I'm looking back at my young years, it was important for me to have the decent apartment and for this apartment to be close to the metro station. But now it's the whole environment, it's the whole range of services. I'm speaking about the traffic, I'm speaking about the social infrastructure and the culture facilities, the green parks and green areas in the city. This kind of approach we utilize and promote. For example, today, in the last 8 years, we built about 7 million square meters of residential and commercial housing real estate. Now we have 3 major projects worth of 3.3 million square meters. It's a project called Heart of the Capital, Serpimolot location in Moscow, and Ramenki location in Moscow. In each of them, we are utilizing the same approach. For example, in Serpin-Molot or Hammer and Sickle, 10 hectares allocated for the parks, for the green areas. And you are doing this. Exactly. It's our responsibility. This is what we do. It's our responsibility to the residents, to the city. In the heart of the capital projects, with our investor, we are increasing the green area 5 hectares. And this will be the continuation. And it will be very comfortable, very beautiful area with access to the Moscow River. This would be the very first element, very mass type of construction, but also construction of industrial areas, what we have been speaking today. It's also a unique thing because those industrial areas were perceived not a very nice place to live, but it's only 4 kilometers from Kremlin. In terms of getting access to the center, it's a unique place. And today, the Moscow government also requiring developers to take into account of where are you going to employ people to avoid this pendulum migration. And this is about building such an infrastructure which would enable us to ensure employments. I'm speaking about shopping malls and some business districts and facilities. All of this has to be developed all along, which makes these places more attractive for population, for people to move in. And the second example would be, we're speaking about clusters and clusterization. Let's say housing and sport facilities. The region of Dynamo, we've launched Dynamo complex. Not only it is a unique sport facility, but Dynamo is also a soccer field. It's a football field of the global level, and this is also ice hockey ring. It's 12,000 seating arena. There was a Kiss concert. There'll be Aguilera and many other famous personas performing. Are you inviting all people to see Christina Aguilera or all others? Well, I guess we're ready. And this is also the residential area, the area for offices and hotels. It's all already completed, and now we're finishing up the small sport facilities. This would be the smaller ice rinks for the kids to skate and ski. These zones of the small sports. It's a cluster which will be the point of attraction not only to those people who live locally, but also will be one of the hot spots in Moscow, which will be attracting Muscovites and people who come visit in the city. And thirdly, with a Dom.rf housing developer. And the second project, actually Matchpoint, the name of the place. It will be a European-level volleyball center for training Russian volleyball team and other leading sport teams. And I want to say that with the Dom.rf Housing Development Corporation, we begin to implement the practice of the rental housing, for example, worth of 19 billion rubles we've invested. It's quite a big volume. In Matchpoint alone, I think it's a 750 residential units. By the way, Andrei, is that really decreasing economy for investor? Because in terms of just selling apartments, I would say its economical component is not that easy with rental housing. But now we are working with investors. Yes, it's not easy for them economically speaking. So we need some regulatory measures, and I believe that we can look into the taxation aspect, but we would like to invite private investors to finance all of these initiatives. So far, the Russian government is doing it in the entity of the Dom.rf, thanks to Alexander. He's sitting right here. He's been very active part in it, because we are getting these apartments ready with internal remodeling, with the furniture in them. They're fully furnished for, let's say, younger families or highly mobile families who come to work in Moscow. I think it's a big step forward. In Russia, there is only 10% of the rental housing. In Germany, there's a 50%. In the UK, it's 25% is a rental housing of the total stock. And I'm not going to mention about digitalization, which makes sense. The bank is doing a lot in digitalization, you may simply grab a bicycle today. There is a VeloBike or the cycling application. Over 50,000 bikes are available in Moscow, and 50 stations in Moscow where you can get these bikes from. As for the mortgage lending, I probably will not give you any new things. The cost of the mortgage, it's a decision of the Russian president. If Russia will be pursuing the right macroeconomic scenario, if it will be decreasing key banking rate and inflation, I think within the couple of years we'll be able to get this target 8% mortgage lending per annum. And I think the government has to keep using the certain subsidies for the families with many children to get subsidized mortgage lending rate. Mortgage is important because it accounts for 50% of the total sales for housing. People buy housing on mortgage. And in Moscow alone, we've issued 50,000 mortgages last year alone. The market is growing, and the central bank, the central bank is very conservative, but they've made a number of decisions to make it easier for people to securitize their mortgage. I believe that this market is going to grow, but still we have to be very careful because we have experience of the year 2007, 2008.
Well, nonetheless, I think today more and more people become aware of advantages of mortgage lending. And I think that in many cities, especially in Moscow, there are no problems today when it comes to funding of real estate construction, on mortgage, and processes that are currently underway will help deal with the issue of people that took mortgage loans or invested at early stages of construction that was never finished. And when we talk about Moscow with our foreign counterparts, we only get positive feedback. The face of Moscow is changing. most advanced urban technologies have been introduced, and it's really making a difference. I have a question. You mentioned a number of landmark projects you do in Moscow that will really embellish the city and are very interesting from the commercial point of view. But do you have similar experience working in other cities of Russia? Moscow is among world leaders, but there are people present here that come from different cities in Russia or globally. Do you have similar large projects in other cities? Well, as a developer, we mostly operate in Moscow. As a lender that provides mortgage loans, we operate throughout the country. But as a developer, let me stress, we appreciate this opportunity to work in Moscow, because when you work with money, you don't see any material, tangible results. And when you build, you can see the results of your work. Mayor Sabanin mentioned that 2 large amusement parks will be built in Moscow next year. We're funding one of them, and it will be a lot of fun for children. So this is what we enjoy. And it also is very profitable. Okay, so we'll know that VTB does development in search of beauty. With this, I want to give the floor to the mayor of Ankara, Mansur Yavaş. He was elected recently. Before that, he was mayor of Beypazarı, which is part of larger metropolitan area of Ankara. And Mr. Yavaş achieved very good results in his previous capacity. This is probably why he was elected mayor of Ankara. In his previous capacity, he developed hotel industry, he did housing renovation, he brought a number of large festivals to the city, he promoted local cuisine, he promoted tourism and created jobs in the region. Right now, Mr. Yavaş, you're facing new challenges. You will work in a metropolitan area in Megacity, Ankara. What will be your first steps to improve urban environment in Ankara? What will be your first steps in your new capacity?
Çok teşekkür ediyorum. Öncelikle bu toplantı için ayrıca teşekkür Beypazarı'nda belediye başkanlığı yaparken şöyle bir hayal sunmuştuk aday olduğum sıra. Beypazarı 35 bin nüfusa sahip, Ankara'nın 100 kilometre uzağında tarımla uğraşıyor.
Thank you very much. Beypazarı is a small city of only 35,000 people. It used to be an agricultural area with zero economic potential, zero financial flows. So when I decided to run as mayor of this little city, a town basically, I understood I'd be facing a very difficult task. How would I find money for the development of this town? When I first came to visit, all buildings were old, wooden, and people that would come to the city center would all ask, why don't you just demolish them? Why don't you build something new and modern? But I thought that preservation of this authentic character will contribute to the development of the city. So we found sponsors that agreed to renovate 500 old historic buildings in the central part of town. And they did it beautifully. They turned those old wooden buildings into hotels, an old traditional Osman Turkish style, and tourists started flocking because everyone wanted to get a sense, a feel of history, and at the same time enjoy modern day's comfort. So first we renovated 25, then another 50, then another 100. And Little by little, all the 500 houses in the central part were renovated. And then all of a sudden, we mentioned that people started coming to our city to start new businesses, new restaurants, to create jobs. People started to come to spend weekends with their families and enjoyed the atmosphere of a historic city. If 10 years ago, tourists would only find themselves in our town by incident, today, we've more tourists than local residents. And it is thanks to tourists that the city economy started developing really rapidly. So we decided we needed to preserve and restore traditional crafts. We opened a number of centers where people can learn traditional crafts. And now people come to this little town from all over the world to learn how to weave a carpet, how to make traditional Turkish bowls and tableware. We also now try to make sure that those centers where traditional crafts are produced, more jobs will be created for women, because in the past those women would stay at home with kids. But now in Bey Pazarı, they enjoy themselves in this new capacity as business women, business ladies, that produce crafts or open their own training centers, and there's a lot of demand for their products throughout Turkey. So this teeny tiny project that we implemented in Bey Pazarı, a small town, 35,000 people only, zero financial potential, it's now replicated throughout Turkey, and I'm proud that we managed to preserve our identity and make it attractive, make our town a center of gravity, and help preserve traditional arts and crafts. And you can find such examples throughout Turkey, where towns that were fading away are now becoming centers of tourism. And since Bey Pazarı was one of districts of Ankara, many people would come, and people from Ankara would come for a weekend. And they witnessed the evolution that was happening over the 10 years. So when Ankara election were announced, I decided to run. And I think the people that appreciated my achievements in Bey Pazarı and elected me as mayor of Ankara, and I hope I will be able to make most of my experience and achieve good results for Ankara as well. Ankara is much bigger than Bey Pazarı, but we'll try to focus on the same principle. We'll preserve the historic identity of this ancient city, Ankara, and offer new opportunities for women who used to be stay-at-home moms and only focus on raising their children. In Ankara, another big problem is public transport, and one of our top priorities would be the development of public transport. Another very serious problem is that Ankara is Turkish capital, but at the same time there are really few foreign tourists that come to Ankara, because Ankara lacks identity. It doesn't have a pronounced historic identity, so people come to Istanbul, people come to other regions. Well, Ankara is not at all popular among tourists, and this is what we want to change. There are so many hot springs around Ankara. There are so many recreation centers or health centers. So it holds great potential and will try to invite people and attract people and introduce them to Ankara's history, Ankara recreational potential. If we look at central Turkey, in Anatolia, there are about 81 regions, and they're all famous for something, for an art or a craft. And we, as center of this valley, of this region, we want to develop all the 81 districts and the same projects that we implemented in Beypazarı will be implemented now in Ankara. So we'll train people coming from those neighboring towns and areas, teach them how to preserve their identity, their traditions, make those traditions attractive for tourists, to make sure that both Ankara and neighboring regions become tourist centers. Beypazarı is a much smaller town, so I had fewer opportunities, less money. There's a lot more money in Ankara, and I hope we will be able to achieve even more. I listened very attentively to my colleague, Mayor of Moscow. He spoke about Moscow's big projects, and this is something I want to learn from and try and learn from these projects for the benefit of Ankara. What does a world city such as Ankara need? We're a capital of Turkey. Clearly, Turkey has been going on through rather difficult times from the point of view of its economy. But I think that I, as mayor of Ankara, should focus on creating a comfortable urban environment for people, create good public transport system. And it's a big problem for Ankara. Reduce costs of living, costs of transportation in Ankara to the acceptable level. Make transportation system convenient and turn Ankara into a center of tourism. Because right now it just isn't. And this is what we want to change. Well, I wish you every success. And colleagues, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that Beypazarı example illustrates the point I made earlier, when authorities focused on environment and that triggered economic development. And they didn't have much choice, really. We have two more speakers. Both will focus on transport. It's an important topic for all cities. Mayor of Ankara just spoke about it. Sergei Sobyanin spoke about transport, about how difficult it is and what achievements Moscow's made. With this, I want to give the floor to Tadao Kamei. Let me remind you, he's president and CEO of Nikken Seikei, which is one of the 3 largest construction and architectural companies in the world, based in Japan, but it operates throughout the world. They have many landmark projects in transport. Shibuya transportation hub in Tokyo is the best known. Mr. Kamei, my question to you, what kind of transport infrastructure do modern megacities need? How can we achieve desired results as we work on such major projects?
First of all, I would like to express my fascination with what Moscow has achieved in the last...
Keep closer, please, to the mic. Yep.
Okay. The scale of change to me is phenomenal. I feel Moscow is getting very younger these days. I'd like to talk about so-called TOD, transit-oriented development projects from my experience. Our firm, Nikken, has a very strong team of urban planners and architects working on TOD projects in Japan and overseas. Interestingly, out of 50 visits stations on Earth, probably 45 stations are in Japan. For example, Shibuya Station, you have mentioned, has a ridership of slightly over 1 billion people per year. We have been working on this project for the last 15 years, and partial completion of this project is expected this year. So I welcome all of you to come and experience the next generation of TOD. In megacities, such habits, TOD, are essential to reduce traffic pressure on historic center. We know that Moscow is shifting to multipolar structure, and the continuous development of transportation habits undoubtedly is the right direction. In Japan, we, Nikken Sekkei, constantly work on improving the TOD habits. It is a continuously evolutionary process, aiming to create a better integration and higher comfort for the people. But we are also known to be a super-aged society, which means such habits have to be barrier-free and silver society friendly. The public space for all the people and all the generation is very important. Right? Спасибо. This is my comment.
Спасибо, господин Камей. Господин Камей почувствовал, что у нас не...
Well, Mr. Kamei sensed that we didn't have much time, and he reduced his statement, and we appreciate it very much. For this, I want to give the floor to Carol Gedane from TomTom, global leader, systems of navigation, mobility. So I want to ask you a question. How do technologies help improve efficiency of transport solutions? And how would you assess the situation in Moscow as compared to other global megacities?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So, yeah, we as a company invented navigation for the masses 20 years ago. And the most important problem we solved was that people couldn't find their destination. They needed maps, they needed directories to arrive where they wanted to go. But in 20 years, mobility has changed very fundamentally. And that old problem of not knowing where to go has now been replaced with other questions. And the questions that we as TomTom, as a technology company, are trying to solve, or where we want to provide a contribution, is to make roads less congested, make them cleaner, and make them, above all, make them safer. And we have developed digital maps, but we also have installed software in a large number of cars and mobile phones that help us to understand how traffic flows. So for Russia and for Moscow in particular, we can see 1 out of 7 vehicles driving in near real time over the roads of Moscow, and we can then provide data-driven analytics of what's going on. What is the congestion level? How can you model traffic? What are the expected results of policy implementations? And that helps to optimize traffic flows. That helps also to make optimal use of all available capacity by dynamically routing vehicles to roads that are less congested and offer a faster road to your destination. There's a lot going to happen a lot has happened in the last 20 years, and a lot is going to happen in the next 20 years. When I was young, having a car was probably the ultimate expression of freedom, a tool to explore the world, and it was the first big ticket item that every youngster would try to buy from his first savings. But that has changed dramatically, also because of technology. With a connected world, it's now much easier to use different modes of transport. You can use taxis easier, you can use shared mobility, like shared cars or bicycles or scooters for the last mile. And it's much easier now than ever before to make mixed use of mixed infrastructure. And that has to be the answer, because what we haven't been able to achieve, also even not at TomTom, is to create physical infrastructure out of software, out of our imagination. There is just a limit to what you can do. And with every successful development in a city, and Moscow is a clear example, creates its own traffic and its own issues again. So it's a real race to do with your infrastructure whatever you can, but also attracting new levels of activity and traffic as a result of that. That cannot go on. Eventually that needs to change. And I think that because of technology and because we're living in a connected world, and because the additions of people and the preferences of especially the younger people are changing, there's a real possibility to start driving vehicles and traffic and private vehicles out of the city bit by bit, and replace that with shared and public transport more and more. And I don't think there are more options other than starting that program. And that is of course difficult because there will be winners and losers, and the losers will be vocal, and it will take time before the winners can actually see what the net results are of those measures. But if we want to make our cities livable and want to give green and a good living condition back to the citizens, and that's what this is all about and this Congress is all about, then there is unfortunately also no other way to really start limiting traffic within the cities with all sorts of measures, including pricing for parking, and I know that's happening, other taxes, whilst providing alternative forms of transport. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a small question to you. How do you see the Moscow comparatively with the rest of the world? What are the main competitive advantages of Moscow city, and where are areas for improvement?
Well, I think Moscow has been enormously proactive in managing the traffic problem and investing serious amounts of money, but also imagination in what to do with traffic and how to deal with that. And we have seen that because we're monitoring all cities and all the roads in the world, that it has led to significant success. And the speed by which that has happened has been really impressive, and that can only be with imaginative and authoritative leadership you can achieve those goals in such a short period of time. But as I said, with the success of the city, you attract new traffic as well, and you attract more tourism, you attract buses, and it's kind of an ongoing battle between measures that provide alternative modes of transport and the economic growth of a city. And that's eventually a battle that you cannot win, and where you do need to make hard choices, we think, and start to limit especially traffic on the roads for private use. And there's a dirty little secret, of course, in the tech industry, and that is that online shopping and delivery of those purchases into the cities will also add to that pressure and will create a whole new level of congestion that we will also see to increase over the coming years.
Thank you. Спасибо.
We are wrapping up our panel discussion. I'm kindly asking Sergei Sobyanin to spend 2 or 3 minutes and share his perspective on those evaluations, recommendations, and experience we've heard so far. It's about reservations again. This is what you want me to say. Well, Skolkovo School of Management definitely is not a reservation. It's a unique project. Thousands of young people are engaged in it. But speaking about creating many such projects would be not very realistic. It is not possible because they cover only minor share. But what's next? What's next? A very small share of proactive Russian population. And how would we build innovation clusters in previous times and the new breakthrough technologies? You know, somewhere in Siberia, in a taiga forest, we would build a factory, a plant, and next to it would be a research R&D center, and then very good, high-quality housing for people working in there, good salaries, and young people would migrate, being the members of the Communist Party, to these scientific places to dedicate their life to science. But now this model does not work at all. I mean, it works, but to be able to say that it has any prospects for the future, that would be unrealistic. And I believe the younger generation would like to live where they feel comfortable, where you have a good cafeteria, good restaurants, and movie theaters, and where you have great green areas, where there is a vibrant environment, and where you have their colleagues and peers hanging out with them. So the challenge is not to multiply such beautiful projects as Skolkovo in Moscow, but to create on the territory of the whole city, citywide, an environment which would be commensurate and comparable with the Skolkovo. This is why not so long ago the presidential decree had been signed in the Russian Federation about creating an innovative Moscow innovation cluster, which would also encompass all the academic, scientific, research scientific institutions and the high-tech companies as well. That is to build such a center of sharing information, of sharing technologies, and innovative platforms, so that these companies and organizations would know about their products and their potential. And building high-quality urban environment is more promising than anything else. And we have to create a city of the future, not a reservation for what the future may be looking like, in our view. I think it's a more promising and more perspective model of developing our cities. As for the rental housing, I would agree with Andrei Kostin that indeed it's one important area of development. In the city of Moscow, there is the biggest percentage of housing which is owned by people among many global cities. People own all the housing in Moscow, but it slows down people's mobility, and it increases, on the other hand, daily traffic, daily in-city migration, and also entails a whole number of problems, which sooner or later this housing stock will lose its quality or livability. So the rental housing has to be increased. The rental housing is conducive to the development of the mobility, and this should be the area of preferences. But we need some guarantees of investors that this would really be a rental housing indeed, not simply some kind of interim phase between building in a block of apartment flats and then selling them later on to the market. We are going to pursue this, and hopefully we will achieve consensus. As for restoration and unique facilities and venues and building high-quality environment at the same time preserving historic core of the city, it's very important for Moscow. We have enrolled the biggest restoration program in the world. We have over 1,000 memorials, architectural memorials. It gives the Moscow the special feel. We are going to continue to do this in the future. And if we're speaking about the transportation interchange hubs, TODs, it's very important. We've built the Moscow Central Circle. It's a central circle of Moscow. Basically, it's above-ground metro, which is transporting about 500,000 people a day. But the radial lines of the railway, for example, the line to the town of Podolsk, there is no high-quality interchange. You have to walk 1 kilometer from your line to the Moscow Central Circle. Will this infrastructure be passenger-friendly? No, of course not. And we have to spend a lot of resources and money to combine these two stations, to rebuild them, rearrange them. But the effect will be colossal. The payout will be huge because we are including hundreds and thousands of people who will be living along this railway line. It is very important. It is extremely important, and we are going to do this line of business. As for the statement that by solving one problem, we get a whole bunch of new problems which have to be resolved. I agree with this statement that life is a struggle, life is a fight, and we're always moving forward. You know, there is no stop in life. If you stop, you're degrading, you're rolling back, and you die eventually. So Moscow is the city of life, of forward movement, and we embrace new challenges. Thank you. Thank you, Sergei Semyonovich. And we have exhausted our time limits. We've exhausted the agenda for this session. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great day. Have a great continuation of our forum. We'll see you later.